Vlad, it is election day, November 2nd, and that means, something different depending on where you are. For some people, they are electing a new mayor. Some others are looking at, some ballot measures that could be transformative. There are some areas looking at changing the way policing is done in certain cities, looking at legalization of marijuana, all that sort of stuff. And of course, two big governor's races that we've been watching.
Yeah, over in New Jersey and in Virginia. But as you say, Anne-Marie, Election Day 2021 has brought local elections, which often don't get a lot of attention, to the national stage. So let's start with New Jersey. Incumbent Democrat Governor Phil Murphy faces Republican candidate Jack Ciattarelli. Both urged voters to show up today at the polls in a race where turnout is expected to be critical. And over in Virginia, Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin are neck and neck in the state's governor's race. The outcome of this election could have huge implications for both parties ahead of next year's midterms. So let us bring in Ed O'Keefe to talk more about these closely watched races. Ed, former President Trump, let's begin here, took part in a virtual rally for Glenn Youngkin last night. What was his message to Virginia voters?
Oh, it was essentially vote for the Republican. He has been a sort of omnipresent figure in this race, but not actually physically here. And that is essentially at the request of the Republican Glenn Youngkin, who made very clear over the course of the general election that he was going to win this on his own, that he was going to go out and be himself, not rely on, not lean on, not co-star alongside Republicans from out of state, arguing that if he was going to win this, he wanted to win it on his own terms, but also to avoid the conversation we're having right now. Because while the president's popularity has slipped into the 40s here in Virginia, the former president is even more unpopular in this state. And Republicans know that. They also remember that he lost by more than 10 points last year. So they understand he's a bit radioactive, as he is in a lot of states across the country that hold these kinds of competitive, or are set to hold these kinds of competitive races next year. So this could be a good example of what to expect from other Republicans in other states where maybe talking about being associated with Trump works in a primary, but won't necessarily help you in a general election. So this quick 6-minute telephone call to fellow Republicans, essentially telling them, vote against those of us in the media, vote against Democrats, elect Glenn Youngkin. Whether that has some helpful or hurtful effect in the last few hours of this, we'll just have to wait and see.
Ed, I thought it was really interesting when we talked at 7 that you said, it's not just Donald Trump, but it's other high-profile Republicans that, seeing Youngkin kind of building momentum, wouldn't mind tagging along too, and he's just not interested in it. I'm wondering if he does end up winning, and I think we saw at least one recent poll that said he was a little bit in the lead. If he does end up winning, what does that say for Republicans running in the future, and what sort of impact could that have on Democrats?
Well, if he wins, doing what he did, I think there's lessons in it for everybody. For his own party, it would be, run on affirmative issues about what you would be for, what you would do. Probably the number one thing is you got to be an engaging enough person to earn this kind of acclaim. Youngkin's been compared to Mitt Romney or Marco Rubio. Some say he's got the personality, the awestruck nature of a Mike Huckabee. Those are guys that have, made it work for them, at least at the statewide level, and in big contests before. And by voting for and having taken the endorsement of the former president, but not appearing with him, in essence keeping him at arm's length, you're at least nodding to your party's history and your party's base, but you're trying to expand the tent by moving on from that, or moving on despite of it. And so I think that would be the big lesson. And then again, the other is he has focused on an issue that really galvanized people in this state and across the country, and that is all issues surrounding education these days. First, the mechanics of it. How is it taught? Is it virtual? Is it in person? What do the kids have to do when they're in the classroom? Do they wear a mask or do they not? And what are they being taught beyond the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s? Critical race theory has been a big topic of conversation in a state where it is not taught, where there is no plan to teach it in public schools, but where there's big concern that it might be fueled in part by conservative media, by Republicans who have made it an issue, understanding that it's unpopular with their base. Terry McAuliffe turns around and says that's race baiting. That's something that doesn't need to be worried about. We should be worried about the economy. And then he pivots to suggest you got to worry about what could be. What if a Trump-aligned Republican gets elected? What if the former president's reelected? We've got to serve as Democrats as a check. Almost all of his advertising, at least that I've seen here in the Washington area, is about Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin in the same sentence. If that doesn't work here tonight, I think it'll be a reminder to Democrats they too have to demonstrate what they've done, what they would do, and look forward, spend less time worrying about what happened in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Ed. It does strike me that a lot of the advertisement that I've seen for the McAuliffe campaign is around Donald Trump. And I'm sure there was nothing more that the McAuliffe camp would have loved than to have former President Trump show up in Virginia to campaign for Youngkin, because that would have just been, icing on the cake. But he didn't, which actually does speak a little to the restraint of the former president. We know he didn't exhibit a lot of that when he was president. But the fact that he didn't turn up is kind of interesting. On the flip side, with critical race theory, when it's not even taught in Virginia schools, it also says to me that here you have a party that is trumpeting something that a lot of people don't understand. I'm sure if you polled people in Virginia and asked them to specifically define what critical race theory is, many of them wouldn't be able to do it. And it's become, just like immigration was in previous elections, sort of this dog whistle. Some people say it's not even really a dog whistle anymore for larger issues at play.
Yeah, and that is the point that Terry McAuliffe made to me when I spoke to him about 10 days ago. He said this is the immigration and MS-13 gang issue of 4 years ago for Republicans. They tried to make the rise or the influence of gangs in Northern Virginia, mostly immigrant Salvadoran gangs, an issue to try to drive out their base and concern independent voters. Well, he argues what they're doing through education is another example of that. But the difference this time is concerns about education generally are a big topic of concern for parents, especially working parents who have to think about, can the kids go to school and I go to work at the same time? Or is something going to hold up the ability of either of us to do that? So they understand that there's that it's grabbed the attention of voters, it's helped grab the support of a lot of voters, and if it works in this election, it'll probably become a big topic of conversation in places like North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, some parts of Texas that'll hold competitive congressional races, and up in the Northeast as well, where a lot of Democrats in Congress will face competitive races.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that critical race theory was sort of brought up initially, like a few weeks ago, but then it morphed into parents having some say in what their children are taught. And the critical race theory portion dropped, and suddenly we saw an ad about the book Beloved. And I thought to myself, not too long ago, we saw like some of these sort of local candidates, not necessarily governor, but other local candidates show up on the ballots, and there were these, in the shape of Trump bomb throwers, and they didn't do very well in local contests. And now perhaps what we're seeing is something that's a little different, a little more, for lack of a better word, refined, in that it's not kind of, it's almost like a nod to the issue that would be a trigger issue. And instead of hitting it head on, it's kind of a more palatable argument, if you will, Ed. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think the broader concern or focus on education and the mechanics of it and who's in charge of it and who has a say has been there the entire time, certainly on the Republican side. I mean, we've seen the surge in school board attendance and sort of, packed, crowded, sometimes angry crowds at these meetings all across the country. Mostly, again, originally about virtual schooling, mask mandates, public safety-related concerns, and then all these other issues of, is critical race theory going to be taught? What books should my kids get a chance to read? In this part of the state, in Loudoun County, a neighboring big county, there's been a lot of conversation about that through the years, and that's the root of which critical race theory and general concerns about education came up again. It was in one of the final debates where McAuliffe was asked about a bill he vetoed when he was last governor that, in his words, would have allowed 25 parents to come in and tell the teacher to teach 25 different books to the 25 kids in the room. He's like, we can't have that, and I don't think there should be that much parental control over education. Well, that right there was grabbed and put in an ad that has just amplified the issue, generally saying, really? You don't think you should have a say? At a time when schooling has become a very sensitive and difficult at times, an emotional issue for people, given the safety concerns. So they took advantage of it. We'll see if it works for them, or if this was just a base motivator, as there have been examples of in this state and elsewhere in the past.
All right, Ed, thank you very much.
All set.
So be sure to join Ed along with Elaine Piano and Major Garrett on Red and Blue for full election night coverage. We will have results and analysis from the governor's race in Virginia and New Jersey, as well as other key races across the country. It all starts today at 5 p.m. Eastern right here on CBSN.